My name is Hannah Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I'm just a freelance graphic designer who works from her cozy little home office in Boulder, Colorado. My life was never glamorous, but I never needed it to be. All I ever wanted was something simple: real love, mutual respect, and a place where I could truly belong. I lost my dad when I was 13. He was a truck driver, kind-hearted and funny, and when he passed away in a highway accident, it shattered our small family. My mom, Linda, worked double shifts at a local clinic to keep things afloat. She raised me with strength, kindness, and this unshakable belief: never settle for someone who makes you feel small just to feel big. I held on to that. I met Daniel Brooks when I was 27 during a hiking trip in Moab, Utah. It started with a clumsy bump while I was struggling with my tent. He laughed, offered to help, and we ended up talking under the stars for hours. Daniel was kind, easygoing, and intelligent. He worked as a financial analyst in Denver and was in town with some college buddies. What struck me most was how present he was. He listened, really listened. I didn't have to pretend to be anyone else with him. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe, grounded, seen. Over the next few years, our love blossomed. We'd take weekend road trips through the Rockies, cook dinner together on lazy Sundays, and share playlists that defined our seasons together. He had this soft way of touching my shoulder when he passed behind me, and he always kissed the top of my head before leaving for work. Daniel came from a completely different world. His parents lived in New York City. His mom, Lorraine Brooks, owned a contemporary art gallery in Chelsea. His father, Richard, was a well-known orthopedic surgeon, and his sister Chloe, a Wharton grad working for a startup in Silicon Valley. I remember the first time I saw a picture of their family on vacation in Lake Como. Everyone was dressed in shades of beige and white linen, champagne in hand, glowing like they belonged on a yacht commercial. And then there was me, small-town Nebraska girl, raised on frozen casseroles and yard sales. I didn't envy them, but I was nervous. "Do they know about me?" I asked Daniel one night, curled up next to him in bed. "Not everything," he said, kissing my shoulder, "but I've told them you're brilliant and grounded, and that I love you." "Will they like me?" "They'll come around," he whispered. "Just be yourself." It took time, but I learned to trust Daniel. He was thoughtful in ways that mattered. When I graduated with my MFA, he bought me a new MacBook Pro. I was overwhelmed. "Daniel," I laughed, "I can't accept this. I mean, I'm just a student. You're working full-time at some corporate tower. I'm still paying off student loans." He shook his head. "Hannah, I wanted to do this. You always put your all into everything. This is my way of saying I see you, and I believe in you." Still, the imbalance made me anxious. I wasn't used to expensive gifts or gestures, but I tried to accept his love the way he knew how to give it. When I finally landed consistent freelance work with a publishing house in Seattle, I started paying my share. We began splitting bills: groceries, utilities, dinners out, and it felt good to contribute. One evening, after we'd just returned from a short trip to Big Sur, Daniel turned to me over Thai takeout and said, "I've been thinking, why don't you move in?" I blinked. "Are you serious?" He smiled. "Yeah. I inherited Grandpa's house here in Boulder, and it doesn't make sense for us to keep driving back and forth. There's plenty of space, no rent. We can just split the other expenses." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to live with him, but because something about it felt real, big, permanent. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I love you, Hannah. I want to build something with you." So I moved in. And honestly, it was beautiful. We painted the guest bedroom together, argued over how to arrange the spice rack, and celebrated little wins, like the day I got my first $2,000 paycheck from a magazine layout gig. He cooked steak and poured wine that cost more than my groceries that week. But somewhere in that domestic bliss, a shadow started to creep in. It began with small comments. When Daniel's college friend Mark visited, he chuckled and said, "You've got a good setup, Dan." Beautiful girlfriend, designer taste, and she works from home. Jackpot. Daniel laughed along. Yeah, she's living the dream. That phrase sat weird with me. Living the dream. As if my life was just floating around his money. One night, I brought it up gently. Sometimes I feel like people assume I'm just here, living off you. He wrapped an arm around me. People are gonna say things. They don't know how hard you work. I do. Still, I whispered, it makes me feel small. He kissed my forehead. Then let's make it official. When the time is right, I'll propose. That'll shut them up. I wanted to believe him. I really did. And then came the day I met his family. Daniel had just taken on a big project at work and couldn't take time off. His mom and sister were flying in from New York and planned to stay for a weekend. They're just a little particular, he warned. Don't take it personally. It's not about you. I should have taken that as a red flag. The moment Lorraine walked through the front door, designer sunglasses perched on her head and heels clicking on the hardwood floor, I knew I was in trouble. So, you're Hannah, she said, looking me up and down. Yes, I smiled. Nice to finally meet you. She didn't return the smile. I imagined someone taller. Chloe came in behind her, scrolling on her phone. She didn't even glance at me before saying, Is this where you live? It's quaint. I offered them water, tried to be gracious, even though my heart pounded in my chest. I'd spent the entire morning cleaning the house, baking cookies, and setting up fresh flowers. Over dinner, Lorraine sipped her wine and asked, So do you pay rent here? I paused. No, but Daniel and I split all other expenses equally. The house was left to him by his grandfather. She tilted her head. That's very modern of you. Living together, rent-free, sounds convenient. I clenched my jaw but smiled. We both contribute in our own way. Chloe scoffed. Yeah, like he pays the bills and you light candles. Daniel wasn't there to witness any of it. He was still at work. I went to bed that night with tears in my eyes. And for the first time, I questioned if love alone was enough. The weekend after Daniel's family left was a strange blur. The house felt colder somehow, even though the late spring sun spilled golden light into every room. I tried to shake it off. I scrubbed the countertops twice. I rearranged the bookshelf in our living room. I even repotted a plant that didn't need repotting. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind distracted. But their words echoed in my head like a cruel chorus. Quaint, convenient, light candles. That night, when Daniel came home, I was stirring a pot of tomato basil soup, trying to pretend everything was okay. How'd it go? He asked casually, tossing his briefcase on the couch. I smiled, too big, too forced. Oh, your mom was charming. He raised an eyebrow. That bad? I turned off the stove, trying to steady my voice. Dan, she basically accused me of freeloading. Chloe barely looked at me. I spent 2 days playing host and trying not to cry. He sighed, leaning against the counter. Hannah, they're just intense. They're used to a certain kind of woman. Don't take it to heart. A certain kind of woman, I repeated, folding my arms. You mean someone from the Upper East Side, with a trust fund and a last name that sounds like a law firm? He smirked, not in amusement, but discomfort. It's not personal, they're just protective. That word, protective, felt like a slap. Of what? Their family name? Their inheritance? He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. They don't know you like I do, that's all. Then why didn't you stand up for me? I asked quietly. Even a simple, Hannah's doing great, would have helped. He hesitated. I didn't want to make things worse. That night, we slept back to back, and the distance between us, once filled with warmth, now felt like a canyon. I started noticing small things after that. Subtle changes. Daniel would get quiet whenever I brought up his family. He stopped inviting me to his Zoom calls with his parents. When he talked to Chloe, he stepped outside or into the garage. Meanwhile, I poured myself into work. I landed a rebranding project with a local coffee chain and spent late nights fine-tuning logo iterations, just to feel useful. Around that time, I started talking more with our neighbor, Jada, a single mom of two who lived across the street. Jada was a nurse, tough as nails, and had a sharp tongue and a heart of gold. One evening, she knocked on our door with a bowl of homemade peach cobbler. "Thought you could use some sweetness," she said with a wink. I invited her in, grateful for the company. We talked for hours. I told her about Daniel's family visit, and she didn't sugarcoat her reaction. "Girl, if he won't stand up for you now, you better believe he won't later. Silence is just as loud as words, sometimes louder." I knew she was right, but I wasn't ready to give up on us. Not yet. A month later, Daniel's parents invited us to New York for a long weekend. I dreaded it, but Daniel insisted. "It'll be better this time, I'll be with you," he promised. I reluctantly agreed. The Brooks Manhattan brownstone was everything you'd expect: gleaming marble floors, abstract art on every wall, and a housekeeper named Irina who didn't speak much English, but kept everything spotless. Lorraine greeted us with an air kiss and a faint look of disapproval. "Well, at least she dressed up this time," I heard her mutter to Richard. Chloe arrived later with her boyfriend Carter, an investment banker with an ego the size of Central Park. At dinner, conversation was strained. Lorraine asked, "So, Hannah, how's the little art thing going?" "It's going well," I said, forcing a smile. "I just completed a full rebranding for Java Mile." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "What's that? A coffee shop?" "A regional chain, actually, over 20 locations." "Oh," she said, clearly unimpressed. Carter chimed in. "You know, Daniel once said he covered most of your bills when you started out. That's love, huh?" Daniel laughed awkwardly. "She's making her own now. We split things." Lorraine didn't look convinced. "Just make sure she signs something before the wedding, darling. You know how things go these days." I dropped my fork. The clink echoed across the table. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Lorraine replied with a tight smile. "It's just a precaution. I mean, you wouldn't object to a prenup, would you?" "Actually," Daniel interjected, "I was going to bring that up later." My heart sank. Not because of the prenup. I understood why people did them, but because he hadn't talked to me first. And worse, he brought it up at his parents' dinner table like it was a casual formality. The rest of the meal passed in a haze. Back at the guest room, I confronted him. "You couldn't have waited until we were alone?" He shrugged. "It came up." "It always comes up, when they're around. And you always stay quiet, or worse, go along with it." He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. "I'm trying to keep the peace." "By throwing me under the bus?" I snapped. "You said you loved me, Dan, but I don't see it when you let them treat me like I'm disposable." He didn't answer. The silence screamed louder than any argument. On the flight back to Colorado, we barely spoke. I stared out the window, watching clouds drift past, wondering when exactly I started fading in his eyes. A week later, Daniel surprised me with an engagement ring, a beautiful vintage emerald cut with a delicate platinum band. He proposed on the back porch as the sun dipped behind the mountains. I said yes. Of course I did. I still loved him. Or maybe I loved who he used to be. We started planning the engagement party. I wanted something small and intimate. Daniel wanted something grand. "A celebration worthy of our future," he said. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I used my own money to pay for a large portion of the event. I booked the venue, handled decorations, designed custom invites, and paid for my mom's and aunt's flights. It felt like my way of proving something. To them, to him, to myself. But as the party neared, my anxiety grew. I didn't want to be judged again. I wanted to be seen, valued. That night, standing in front of a mirror in a deep green silk dress, I whispered to my reflection, "Don't let them break you." I didn't know then how much I would need to hold on to those words, because the storm was just getting started. The night of our engagement party arrived with a sky smeared in watercolor pinks and oranges, the kind of sunset you wanted to frame. The venue, a rooftop restaurant in downtown Denver, looked beautiful, rows of string lights twinkling overhead, white hydrangeas lining the railings, and jazz music floating gently in the background. I had spent weeks planning every detail, from the custom signature cocktails to the monogrammed napkins. I wanted everything to be perfect, not just for Daniel and me, but to prove something to his family, that I was capable, that I belonged. My mother, Linda, flew in the day before with my Aunt Margaret, who hadn't traveled since 2009. Seeing them step out of the Uber, eyes wide and glistening, made the exhaustion of event planning worth it. "Sweetheart," Aunt Margaret gasped, "this place is stunning. You did all this?" "Every inch," I said, smiling. "And paid for most of it, too," my mom added proudly. But pride quickly twisted into tension the moment the Brooks family arrived. Lorraine swept in like she owned the air, wearing a tailored navy jumpsuit and a pearl necklace so large it could have paid off a mortgage. Chloe followed in heels too tall for the gravel terrace, holding hands with her fiancé Carter, who barely acknowledged my mom's handshake. "Well, this is elaborate," Lorraine said, glancing around the rooftop like she was judging the floral arrangements. "I suppose it's a modern kind of charm." "It's lovely," Daniel said, trying to ease the mood. "Hannah did an amazing job." I exhaled silently, appreciating that he said it out loud this time. But the relief was short-lived. During dinner, seated between Carter and Lorraine, I tried to hold polite conversation. "Carter, how's the new merger going?" I asked, trying to sound genuinely interested. "Oh, it's going well," he said with a smug grin. "Real work, you know. High-stakes decisions, big numbers. I guess you wouldn't be familiar with that kind of pressure." "Carter," Daniel cut in, frowning. "Come on." "Just saying," Carter shrugged. "There's a difference between doodling logos and moving capital." "I run a business," I said calmly, "with clients, deadlines, and deliverables." "It's more than doodling," Lorraine chimed in, swirling her wine. "It's admirable, really, that you've turned your little hobby into something profitable. Must be nice having Daniel's support during the lean times." "I support myself," I replied, sharper than I intended. "Always have." "Of course," she smiled, eyes cold. "That's why he's always covering your plane tickets, right?" My chest tightened. I glanced at Daniel, but he was looking down at his plate, saying nothing. The knife twisted deeper. Later, during toasts, my mom stood up, holding a champagne flute. "To my daughter," she said, her voice steady but warm, "who has built a life with creativity, compassion, and courage. And to Daniel, for seeing all that she is." The small crowd clapped. I caught Daniel's eyes. He smiled at me, and for a second, I believed maybe things would be okay. Then Lorraine stood. "I suppose I should say something too," she began, and a hush fell over the crowd. Daniel has always been a generous soul, kind, brilliant, ambitious. So naturally, he'd be drawn to someone passionate, someone who dreams. She looked at me, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. But dreams don't always pay the bills, do they? A few polite chuckles from guests who didn't know better. "We're just so glad he's chosen someone who appreciates his hard work, and we trust that she'll grow into the kind of partner who matches his vision." My blood ran cold. I felt every cell in my body tighten with humiliation. My mom reached under the table and gave my hand a firm squeeze. Chloe whispered something into Carter's ear, and they both smirked. I stood, my hands trembling. "Thank you, Lorraine," I said, forcing a smile, "for reminding me why I worked so hard to pay for this night." A few people looked confused. Some looked uncomfortable. Daniel finally stepped in, clearing his throat. "All right, let's move on to dessert." But the damage was done. After the party, I slipped away to the balcony. The city lights twinkled below, mocking me with their cold indifference. I was staring into the skyline when Chloe walked up behind me. "You know," she said, casually sipping her drink, This whole thing? It won't change how they see you. I turned slowly. And how exactly do they see me? You're the girl from Nebraska who thinks design work is a career and thinks love is enough to climb the ladder. Better than being the girl who hides behind her last name, I snapped. Her eyes narrowed. Watch it. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. Back inside, I found Daniel talking with his cousin Ryan, who'd flown in from Seattle. Ryan was different from the rest, laid back, kind, with a real curiosity about people. You okay? He asked when I approached. I tried to smile. Just a little tired. They're tough, he said gently, glancing toward Lorraine. Don't let them get to you. You've got more grace than all of them combined. I almost cried. That night, back at home, I confronted Daniel. You said you'd protect me, I began. You said it would be different this time. He looked genuinely confused. What did I do? You let them humiliate me, again, in front of everyone. You didn't say a word. They didn't mean it like that, he said. Lorraine was just being traditional. No, Dan, she was being cruel, and you let her. He stood up, pacing. You always read into things too much. Can't we just enjoy the fact that we're getting married? Not if I feel like I'm marrying into a firing squad, I said quietly. The room fell into silence. For the first time, I wondered if this love was strong enough to survive the war waged in whispers and smiles. The next morning, Daniel brought me coffee in bed. He didn't apologize. Just placed the mug on the nightstand and said, Let's just move forward. I stared at the steam curling up from the cup, wondering how many more things I'd have to swallow in silence. The engagement party had left more than a sour taste. It had cracked something deep inside me, something that would soon split wide open. And I realized then, I could either keep playing the good fiancé or start reclaiming my voice. I just didn't know that choice would come at such a public cost. The wedding was everything I'd once imagined as a little girl. It was held at the base of the Rocky Mountains, at a charming vineyard resort in Aspen, where the air smelled like pine and late spring blossoms. Rows of ivory chairs sat neatly on the manicured lawn, framed by wildflower arrangements in shades of soft blush and sage. My dress, a fitted ivory gown with lace sleeves and a cascading train, was one I had helped design myself, working closely with a boutique dressmaker from Boulder. It wasn't the most expensive gown at the bridal shop, but it felt like me. Simple, elegant, honest. The ceremony was short and sweet. Daniel looked devastatingly handsome in his dark gray suit, his hazel eyes locked on mine as we exchanged vows beneath a wooden arch draped in eucalyptus and linen. For a brief, suspended moment, I believed this would be the beginning of something beautiful. Maybe even the family would soften. Maybe love really did conquer all. But hope, like mist in the mountains, is easily blown away. From the moment the reception began, the mask slipped from Lorraine's face. It started subtly, her criticizing the menu options to the caterer, whispering sharply that the rosemary duck confit is far too adventurous for this crowd. I had chosen the menu myself, months ago, tasting and tweaking every detail. Then came the seating arrangement drama. Lorraine refused to sit next to my mom and insisted her table be moved closer to the band, as if proximity to the musicians somehow equated to power. It's our son's wedding, she said coolly to the planner. I believe I deserve a better view than the groom's hairline. I overheard that. I wish I hadn't. But I did. During dinner, Chloe leaned across the table with a mocking smile. I have to admit, the dress turned out better than I expected. Looks like you managed to clean up nicely. Thank you, I replied, keeping my voice even. It was a gift from my mom. Of course, she said, taking a sip of wine. She's always had a knack for making things look more expensive than they are. I blinked at her. Is that supposed to be a compliment? She just smiled and said nothing more. Meanwhile, Carter, the ever-condescending fiancé, Spent the evening chatting up Daniel's groomsmen about hedge funds and venture capital. Weddings are just elaborate money pits, he declared loudly at one point. Unless, of course, you marry well. Then it's just a good investment. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Still, I kept smiling for the camera, for the guests, for Daniel. But each flash of the photographer's lens felt like it captured a lie. As the night wore on, I found a moment to breathe alone near the vineyard path, hidden by rows of grapevines and fairy lights. My best friend, Maya, who'd flown in from Portland, found me there. "You okay?" she asked, handing me a glass of champagne. "I've seen hostage situations with better vibes than this." I laughed, grateful for her sarcasm. It's like performing in a play where everyone forgot the script except me. "You don't have to keep performing," she said gently. "If it hurts, you can leave." "Not on my wedding night," I replied. "That would be dramatic." "Maybe, but it wouldn't be wrong." Her words lingered in my mind long after the last guest had gone. The next morning, we returned to the Boulder house, exhausted and emotionally drained. There was no honeymoon planned. Daniel had a work deadline, and I had taken on a branding campaign for a local artisan chocolate company. We told ourselves we'd do a delayed trip later in the year. We never did. Days turned into weeks, and life began to take on the weight of routine. Daniel left earlier, came home later. His promotions at work brought more meetings, more pressure, more distance. He no longer asked about my projects. When I excitedly showed him a magazine that featured my latest logo redesign, he barely looked up from his laptop. "That's great, babe," he said, eyes still glued to a spreadsheet. "We should celebrate," I tried. "Maybe dinner at that new place on Pearl Street?" "Too busy this week. Rain check." I ate alone that night. My mom called often, checking in gently. "How's married life treating you?" she asked one afternoon. I paused. "It's quiet." "And are you happy with that?" I didn't answer. The silence said enough. Then came the baby talk, or rather, the expectation. Lorraine called one Sunday morning, her voice syrupy and condescending. "Just reminding you, dear, the Brooks lineage doesn't preserve itself." "We're not in a rush," I replied, biting my tongue. "Well, at your age, you should be," she said. "You know, some things don't wait forever. Fertility is a tricky thing, and Daniel deserves a legacy." I told Daniel about the call, hoping he'd say something reassuring. He didn't. "She means well," he mumbled. "Don't overthink it." But I was already overthinking everything. Was this what marriage was supposed to feel like? Like tiptoeing across cracked glass floors, hoping not to fall through? Then came a letter. Handwritten. From Lorraine. Delivered by courier. Inside was a list. Yes, a literal list of acceptable family activities she'd like me to start attending. Charity luncheons, gallery openings, social clubs. At the bottom, a final note. "It's important you learn how to carry yourself in the circles Daniel moves in. Appearances matter." I stared at the paper until my vision blurred. That evening, I placed the letter on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of wine. Daniel walked in and saw it. "She's just trying to include you." "By sending me a schedule like I'm being trained for finishing school?" "You're overreacting." That phrase, overreacting, felt like a blade. I set the wine glass down, gripping the counter to steady myself. "Do you even see me anymore?" I asked. "Do you care how this is affecting me?" "I'm tired, Hannah," he said. "You make everything into a battle." "Because I'm tired of fighting alone," I snapped. "Of defending myself in my own home. Of smiling through insults and pretending it doesn't matter." He shook his head and walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering when the man I loved had become a stranger sharing my bed. The next day, I called Maya. "I think I made a mistake," I whispered. "You didn't make a mistake," she said. "You just chose someone who forgot how to fight with you, not against you." And just like that, something inside me began to shift. I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. But I had stopped pretending. The wedding had been beautiful. The photos were perfect. The cake was delicious. But under all the layers of lace and frosting was a truth I could no longer ignore. I had married into a family that saw me as an outsider. Worse, I had married a man who stood on the sidelines while I was being torn apart. And deep down, a quiet voice had started to grow louder. A voice that said, "You deserve more than this. You always have." The email came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Daniel had just been promoted to Senior Regional Director of Finance at his firm. A massive step up, something he'd been quietly chasing for the past year. I remember the moment he called me, his voice light and boyish, the way it only sounded when he was genuinely happy. "I got it," he said breathlessly. "They announced it today. It's official." I smiled genuinely. "You deserve it, Dan. I'm proud of you." I meant it too. For all our cracks and silences, part of me still wanted us to win. Together. That evening, as he poured himself a celebratory glass of whiskey, I made a quiet decision. I was going to throw him a party, not just a dinner, not just some half-baked toast in our kitchen. A real party, one that reflected how hard he'd worked, how far he'd come. I wanted to remind him, and maybe even myself, of the joy we used to share, the way we used to celebrate each other. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into planning. I reached out to a chic restaurant in Cherry Creek with a private rooftop. I worked with a local event designer to coordinate florals and lighting. I had custom invitations designed and printed, with gold foil and a minimalist layout. I coordinated with his assistant, Krista, to gather his close colleagues' contact information, and even included some of his college buddies and extended family. And I paid for everything, quietly, from my savings, and a portion of the trust fund I had recently accessed from my late father. Daniel didn't know. I didn't want the gesture to be about money. I wanted it to be about love, about pride, about showing up. On the day of the party, I spent hours getting ready. I wore a fitted navy blue dress, simple yet elegant, paired with heels that were slightly too high for comfort. My hair was curled, my makeup soft. I stood in the mirror and told myself, tonight is about celebration, not survival. The venue was stunning. Golden lights sparkled overhead as dusk rolled in, and the Denver skyline shimmered in the background. Guests began arriving, and soon the terrace was full of laughter, clinking glasses, and warm hugs. Daniel arrived a little late. He walked in, looked around in astonishment, and then at me. "You did all this?" he asked, clearly moved. "Of course," I smiled. "You earned it." He kissed me then, gently, and for a moment, I felt that familiar spark. For a while, everything went smoothly. People were genuinely enjoying themselves. Daniel beamed, hugged people he hadn't seen in years, and made his way from table to table like a seasoned host. My mother, Linda, chatted with his Aunt Susan about gardening and charity work. Even Chloe seemed to be on decent behavior, sipping white wine and snapping selfies with her fiancé. But then Lorraine arrived. Late, of course, and already wearing an expression like she was arriving at a crime scene rather than a party. She wore a silk lavender dress and a fur shawl despite the mild temperature. Her entrance sucked the joy out of the air. She walked up to Daniel, kissed him on the cheek, and barely looked at me. "Well, this is extravagant," she said, eyes sweeping the decor. "You'd think you got promoted to CEO." Daniel laughed. "It's just a little party, Mom." "Little?" She raised an eyebrow. "Daniel, how much did this cost you?" "Actually," I interjected gently, "I paid for it." Lorraine turned to me slowly, as if noticing a stain on her favorite blouse. "You did?" "Yes," I said, holding her gaze. "I wanted to celebrate Daniel properly. I took care of everything." "With whose money?" she asked, voice low and cold. I blinked. "Mine." "Oh, right," she said, nodding slowly. "Your art money." "I run a design studio," I replied calmly. "I have a full roster of clients and a stable income. And I also recently accessed my father's trust fund. How convenient, she muttered. I turned away before I said something that would ruin the entire night. But Lorraine wasn't done. After dinner, as speeches began, she walked up to the mic. I froze. She wasn't on the schedule. Daniel tried to wave her off, but she smiled sweetly and said, "Just a few words, darling." The room quieted. "We're all so proud of Daniel," she began, voice syrupy. "He's always been hardworking, generous, and brilliant. And of course, generous men sometimes attract attention." A few people chuckled nervously. My heart began pounding. He's given so much, financially, emotionally, and unfortunately, sometimes people take advantage of that. I locked eyes with her, daring her to stop. She didn't. It's lucky we insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Otherwise, who knows where his finances would be? After all, extravagant parties don't pay for themselves, unless, of course, someone is very motivated. A few people gasped. Someone coughed. The silence was thunderous. I stepped forward. "Lorraine." But she cut me off. "I'm just saying, not everyone is what they seem. And when a woman has no clear career and suddenly accesses large sums of money, well, people talk." My vision blurred. I turned to Daniel, who was frozen, then said, "Mom, that's enough." "Is it?" she asked, tilting her head. "I'm just telling the truth. Isn't that what families do?" I turned back to the crowd, my breath shaky, hands trembling. But I was done playing quiet. "You want the truth?" I asked, voice rising. "Here it is." I pulled out my phone and opened a PDF, my bank statement. "Here's my business account. Here's the trust fund I accessed after months of legal processing. And here's the breakdown of every dollar I spent tonight. This was my gift to Daniel, not a manipulation, not a trap, a gift. Because I loved him." The room was dead silent. Lorraine stepped back like I'd slapped her. "Is that supposed to impress us?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "But it's meant to silence you, because I won't let you rewrite my story anymore." I turned to Daniel. And you? Where were you when your mother called me a gold digger in front of everyone we know?" He looked torn, ashamed. "I didn't expect her to say that." "You didn't stop her either." "Hannah, don't do this here." "Why not? She humiliated me here. Maybe this is the only place you'll listen." "You're overreacting," he said again, and that was the final crack. I nodded slowly. "Okay, then let me react properly." I turned to the guests. "Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the evening. But as of now, the party is over." Then I turned back to Daniel. "And so is this marriage." Gasps, whispers. Lorraine's mouth dropped open. Daniel reached for my arm. "Hannah, wait!" But I stepped away. My mother was suddenly by my side, calm and unwavering. "Let's go, sweetheart." And I did. I walked away in heels that pinched my feet and a heart that finally stopped apologizing for how loudly it beat. That night, as I slipped off my dress and wiped off my makeup, I looked at myself in the mirror and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Power. Not the kind that comes from money or titles, but the kind that comes from standing up and saying, "No more." No more shrinking. No more smiling through disrespect. No more letting love be an excuse for pain. The celebration was meant to honor Daniel. In the end, it revealed the truth. I had been the one worth celebrating all along. I left that party with nothing but my phone, my dignity, and the sound of stunned silence echoing behind me. The night air hit my skin like a baptism, cold and sharp and purifying. My mother drove me home in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. I sat next to her, still in my navy blue dress, heels abandoned in the back seat, mascara smudged beneath my eyes. But I wasn't crying anymore. Something inside me had finally snapped, not in a way that broke me, but in a way that set me free. When we arrived at the house I shared with Daniel, everything felt eerily still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I walked upstairs, changed into sweats, and grabbed the duffel bag I'd kept in the back of my closet for emergencies. It wasn't full, just a few clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and a hard drive that held years of my design work. My mother waited by the door, patient, composed. "You sure?" she asked gently. I nodded. "If I don't leave now, I'll lose myself." "Then let's go." I left a note on the kitchen counter. Nothing dramatic, just a line he would understand. "Don't call me until you've figured out why you never stood up for me." That night, I moved into my mom's small apartment in Boulder. The place was modest. 2 bedrooms, mismatched furniture, a chipped kitchen counter. But it felt like sanctuary. I slept on the pull-out couch for the first few nights, listening to the wind rattle the windows and trying to figure out how I'd gone from being a bride to a refugee in my own life. The next morning, I called my cousin Mallory, a divorce attorney in Denver. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Come in tomorrow. We'll get the papers started." At her office, I sat across from her mahogany desk, fingers trembling as I signed the first round of documents. "Because of the prenup," Mallory explained, "everything you had before the marriage stays yours. They can't touch your trust or your business. This will be cleaner than most divorces." "Except for the emotional part," I muttered. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "That part's never clean." The days that followed were strange, quiet. I focused on my design work, throwing myself into color palettes and typography like they were life rafts. My studio inbox overflowed with new inquiries. Apparently, the promotion party had been a subtle networking jackpot. I booked 5 new clients that week. Funny how life works. Daniel, meanwhile, started calling on day 3. I didn't answer. He sent flowers, roses, orchids, lilies. I threw them away. He emailed, he texted. Long paragraphs filled with apologies, questions, confusion. "Can we talk? Please come home." "I didn't know how much it hurt you." "I'll fix it." I didn't respond, not once. On day 10, he showed up at my mom's door. I heard the knock and froze. My mother answered. "She's not interested in talking," she said firmly. "Please, Linda, just 5 minutes," he pleaded. "She's my wife." "Not anymore," she replied and closed the door in his face. He didn't leave right away. He sat on the porch for an hour. Then 2. I watched from the upstairs window, my heart caught between sympathy and steel. I didn't go down. That night, he sent a long voice message. I didn't listen. On day 15, he showed up at my workplace, a shared creative studio downtown. I was in the middle of presenting brand mock-ups to a new client when the front desk buzzed. "A Daniel Brooks is here to see you," the receptionist whispered. My stomach dropped. "Tell him I'm not available," I said. He refused to leave. Security eventually escorted him out. That evening, Mallory called. "If this keeps up, we'll file a restraining order." "I don't want to destroy him," I said quietly. "Then he needs to stop pretending he didn't already destroy you." A week later, I served the divorce papers at his office, delivered by a professional process server. Clean, unapologetic. He stopped calling after that. But then came Lorraine. She started spreading rumors, first in whispers among Daniel's colleagues' spouses, then online. Claims that I'd cheated, that I'd married for money, that I had manipulated Daniel into the marriage. I ignored the noise until one of my clients, an old acquaintance of Lorraine's, called to ask if I was okay. "She's saying some wild things," the client said cautiously. "I don't believe her, but I thought you should know." That was the last straw. I drafted a public letter. Not a tell-all, not a dramatic explosion. Just the truth. I posted it to my professional site and my personal Instagram. It read, "To those who've heard rumors, yes, Daniel and I are getting divorced. No, I didn't cheat. I didn't steal. I didn't marry for money. I married because I believed in love, in partnership, in growth. I left because silence in the face of disrespect is not love. I left to protect my peace, and I stand by that choice." The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages. Former clients, old friends, even strangers who had seen me at that rooftop party. They told me they saw what happened, that they heard what Lorraine said, that I wasn't alone. I cried for the first time in weeks, not because I was sad, but because I finally felt seen. 1 month later, the divorce was finalized. Daniel didn't contest anything. We split what little joint property we had: the car, the kitchenware, the couch. I let him keep the Le Creuset set. It felt symbolic. On the morning the final papers came through, I packed the last box from my mom's apartment and moved into my new condo in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It wasn't fancy, just a 2-bedroom with a sunlit kitchen and a tiny balcony filled with succulents. But it was mine, and it was quiet, peaceful, whole. I started waking up earlier. I joined a yoga class. I got a dog, a rescue mutt named Jasper, with floppy ears and a need for constant cuddles. I painted again, not for money, just for me. My studio grew. I hired 2 part-time assistants and rebranded under my own name: Hannah Carter Creative, clean, bold, unapologetic. One afternoon, as I sat on the balcony with Jasper asleep on my lap, my phone buzzed. A message from Maya. Heard from Ryan that Daniel's job is a mess. His team's turning on him. Company's under review. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. I didn't need updates on Daniel. That chapter was over. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly stitched itself back together. Not into the same pattern, but into something new, something stronger. I began dating again, cautiously. Coffee here, a hike there. Nothing serious, just learning to trust myself again, to be seen not as someone's wife, someone's burden, someone's accessory, but as me. One evening, over dinner with Maya, she asked, "If you could say one thing to him now, what would it be?" I paused, thought, smiled. "Thank you for teaching me exactly what I never want again." That night, as the stars lit up the desert sky and the wind whispered through the cacti, I realized something that changed everything. I had spent years trying to prove my worth to people who'd already decided I didn't have any. And in doing so, I forgot the most important truth of all. I was already enough. I always had been. And now, finally, I believed it. 6 months had passed since the divorce was finalized, and yet it felt like another lifetime. Santa Fe had become more than a hiding place. It had become a rebirth. Every street corner whispered peace. The art galleries along Canyon Road, the scent of roasted green chili from local markets, the warm adobe colors of the houses, all of it wrapped around me like a second skin. My condo, once quiet and unfamiliar, was now alive with rhythm. Jasper, my overly affectionate rescue dog, followed me from room to room, never letting me forget I was not alone. My small studio, Hannah Carter Creative, had evolved into a full-time agency. I hired 2 amazing women: Carmen, a brilliant Latina UX designer with a sharp eye and zero tolerance for mediocrity, and Naomi, a recent art school grad who reminded me of my younger self: idealistic, stubborn, and beautifully messy. The 3 of us worked side by side in a sun-drenched co-working loft with exposed brick and endless coffee. Clients loved us. We were fast, honest, and never sugar-coated feedback. We were a team, a family. A few weeks after I finalized my move, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Daniel, handwritten. The handwriting alone brought back memories. His neat, slanted cursive he used when signing greeting cards or scribbling notes on the fridge. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside were 3 pages. No attacks. No pleas. Just quiet acknowledgement. "Hannah, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about everything: what I did, what I didn't do, and how I let my silence become complicity. I watched my mother tear you down, and I stood there, arms at my sides, because I thought keeping peace meant staying quiet. I see now that it didn't. You didn't leave because you were dramatic. You left because I gave you no choice. You asked me for protection, and I gave you a wall. I hear your silence now. I understand it. And though I miss you, I respect your distance. You were never a gold digger, Hannah. You were gold I didn't know how to protect. Daniel, I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, but because there was nothing more to say. One sunny morning in late March, Maya flew in to visit. She stepped off the small plane in a flowing linen dress, oversized sunglasses, and with the kind of energy that made everyone in baggage claim look up. We hugged tight, holding each other like women who'd been through wars and came out the other side in full color. That night, over margaritas and grilled corn on my little balcony, she asked, "So, now that the dust has settled, what comes next?" I laughed, taking a sip of my drink. I just want to live. No more rich boy heartbreaks, she teased. No more trying to fit into someone else's life like a placeholder. You know what I see when I look at you now? She asked. I shook my head. A woman who doesn't need to be chosen anymore, because she already chose herself. That hit deeper than I expected. Later, after she'd gone to bed and Jasper was curled up at my feet, I sat in the quiet of the living room, journaling, something I had started doing daily since the move. I wrote about everything, the betrayal, the shame, the strength, the nights I cried into my pillow, and the mornings I stood tall anyway. I wrote about the rooftop party, about the stairs, about the moment I raised my voice and reclaimed my name. And I wrote about the lesson I never wanted to forget, that love should never cost your voice. A few months later, an opportunity came that would have once terrified me. A TEDx organizer from Santa Fe reached out after stumbling upon my Instagram post about the divorce. She asked if I'd consider telling my story. I think a lot of women need to hear what you've lived through, she said. My first instinct was to say no, to stay safe, but that voice, the one I had finally stopped silencing, nudged me forward. Yes, I said. I'd be honored. I spent weeks writing the talk, rewriting it, practicing it in front of the mirror. I didn't want to vilify Daniel or his family. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The day of the event, I stood behind the curtain, palms sweating, heart pounding. Carmen and Naomi sat in the front row. Maya had flown in again. My mom sat in the center, tears already in her eyes. When I stepped onto the stage, the lights were blinding. But I spoke anyway. I spoke about love, about silence, about the cost of not being defended. I spoke about what it means to lose yourself while trying to be lovable. And then I spoke about coming back home to yourself, about choosing peace over perfection and voice over validation. The applause at the end was thunderous, but the best part came afterward, when a young woman approached me, eyes wide with tears. "Thank you," she said. So I was engaged to someone like Daniel, and tonight I decided to walk away. That moment made everything worth it. In the months that followed, my agency grew. I launched a mentorship program for young female designers. I started painting again, holding a small exhibit in a downtown gallery. And I started dating, not searching for love, but letting connection happen naturally. One man, in particular, Eli, stood out. A quiet school teacher, with kind eyes and a laugh that came from his belly. He never talked over me, never made me feel small. We're taking it slow, no grand promises, just steady, quiet companionship. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. I will never again beg to be seen. I will never again dim myself for someone else's comfort. I will never again believe that survival is the same as love. The girl who once stood silent while being called a gold digger in front of a crowd now stands tall on stages, telling other women that they are not what people call them. They are what they choose to become. And I chose to become whole, free, loud in all the ways I was once hushed. That's the real happy ending. Not a perfect man, not a perfect life, but a perfect truth. I am enough, just as I am, and no one gets to tell me otherwise again. If this story touched your heart, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful moment. We share real emotional stories that inspire healing, strength, and self discovery. There's so much more to come. Stories of resilience, growth, and the kind of truth that stays with you. Join our community, where every voice matters and every experience is honored. Subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care of yourself. You deserve peace, love, and everything in between.